Hello to you. Here is a video that will show you how to add a machine to your Nagios monitoring. So, as a prerequisite for this video, of course, you need to have a Nagios server installed, meaning that the Nagios server software must be installed on a Linux machine. If you need help with these prerequisites, I have videos that could assist you. I invite you to check the description. So once the Nagios server is installed and available on your environment, you now need to add hosts, which are the machines to be monitored. I will quickly show you how to add a host, how to prepare the configuration files to add one or more hosts. Subsequently, other short videos will be coming to my YouTube channel to explain in detail how to add more advanced monitoring than just checking if the machine is responding on the network. For example, monitoring the CPU of a Linux machine, a network port, an HTTP service, an internet web page, an SSL certificate, etc. All of this will be segmented into several short videos, but they will have as a prerequisite this video that I am currently making, which is to prepare configuration files and add hosts to monitor. So by the end of this video, we will have a host added, but the only monitoring that will be done will be through pings to validate if the machine is responding on the network. So if the machine is up and responding on the network, it will be green. Otherwise, it will be red, thus having an error status in the Nagios console. And later, we will add more advanced monitoring with the help of other videos. So, the first step in this video is to find our Nagios configuration file. If you followed my video that shows you how to install Nagios on an Ubuntu server from the Ubuntu repositories, the location of the Nagios configuration file will be as follows. If you installed Nagios on a different Linux distribution than Ubuntu, or if you compiled the Nagios server manually, the location may be different. If you really don't know where the configuration is, I invite you to use the command locate nagios.cfg. Of course, the locate command must be installed on your machine. If it is not, you can either install it or simply use the find command. Here is the command to run. It will search your entire system for files that end with nagios.cfg. Why did I add sudo? It's to grant administrative rights to this command. This is to avoid errors indicating that it is impossible to search in a certain directory. So there you go. These two commands give me the location of my main Nagios configuration file. So that was the first step. In the case of my machine, most of the Nagios configuration files will be in this directory, as well as in this directory. So if you installed Nagios in a different way than I did in my video showing this, you need to find where your configuration files are. So here, if we explore this configuration file, this is the main configuration file for Nagios. This is where we can define the configuration files that will be used by Nagios for the objects that we will configure in our monitoring environment. An object in Nagios can be a host to monitor or a service to monitor. For instance, one example of a service could be monitoring the CPU usage of Windows machine. Additionally, other services might include monitoring the memory usage of Windows machines or the disk space. These are just a few examples of the various services that can be configured in Nagios. A Nagios object can also be a contact, a Nagios command, a time period. In short, almost anything that can be configured inside Nagios. It can also be a template, which is a configuration that will be used by several other objects. For example, if you have redundant settings for the configuration of your Linux servers, you can consolidate those settings into a template. Subsequently, all hosts using that template will inherit the configurations specified in that template. In short, in this main Nagios configuration file, we need to specify our files that will be used to put our Nagios object configurations. If you want, you can make one file only and put everything in it. Or you can segment them into several files, one file per type of thing, for example. That's the approach I prefer to use, which is to create small configuration files that we place in the objects directory. And then we add instructions here to tell our Nagios server to look at these configuration files. So you can create as many files as you want. For example, if you have several machines running Windows 11, several machines running Ubuntu Linux, servers running Red Hat Linux, routers, switches, you can make a configuration file for each type of equipment. So one configuration file for Windows Desktop, one configuration file for Ubuntu Linux, a configuration file for Windows Services 2, a configuration file for monitoring web services, another on for network services, etc. So it's up to you to define how you want to configure it. In my case, for what I want to show you, I will only create two configuration files, one for hosts and one for services. So I will add two lines in this file. In fact, the best practice, as we see here in the comment, would be to define the configuration files for our Linux machines here, the configuration files for our Windows machines here, the configuration files for our routers and switches here. In my case, I will add it here. I will create a file called host.cfg and a configuration file called services.cfg for the services. I will separate the hosts and services into distinct files. So in your case, think about how you want to organize your hosts, your services, your routers, and define those files here. So once I am done, I will save the main Nagios configuration file, and I will exit my text editor. I will now create the files I just defined in Nagios. Otherwise, it will result in an error because the files doesn't exist. First, I will navigate to my objects directory. I will start by creating host.cfg. Oops, I made a small mistake. This action requires administrative rights. I can execute a command with administrative privileges by adding sudo in front of the command. There we go. Next, I will create an empty file called services.cfg. For now, both files will be empty. In the next few moments, I will quickly show you how to add a very basic host. In my future videos, I will show more specific monitoring things. For example, I will explain how to check if a machine is listening on a specific network port, and also how to verify whether a particular process is running. I even believe there is a way to monitor if your network printer has paper left and send an alert when it runs out. I also have a video demonstrating how to monitor a Linux machine or a Windows machine. In these cases, you can monitor various metrics such as CPU usage, memory usage, and disk space usage, among others. Now I will open back my host.cgf file and we will add a host. I will copy and paste a very simple configuration. When defining a host in a Nagios configuration file, the line must start with define host followed by these parentheses. The host options must be specified within these parentheses. So we will specify the options we want for this host. There are several options available, and we will start with the simplest ones. Later, I will create a dedicated video to describe more options that can be assigned to a host. The host name is the name that we want Nagios to use for this machine. I have named it ubserver01 or simply ubserv01. It's a small Ubuntu server that I have in my lab for testing purposes. The alias is the name we want to be displayed in Nagios. Sometimes it's more practical to use a more meaningful name here, such as Ubuntu Server 01. The alias can have multiple words. It is used to define a longer name or description used to identify the host. In my case, I will use the same name as the host name. The address refers to the IP address of this host. If you have a DNS server in your network and your Nagios server is configured to use that DNS server, you can use the DNS name of this machine. In my case, I will keep it very simple. I will stay with the IP address. You can add as many define host entries as you want. For example, if you have 10 routers to monitor and ping, you would create 10 define host entries and adjust each of their options according to the host. Each host will have a different host name and IP address. If we leave our host configuration like this, it won't work because there are other mandatory parameters that must be defined for a host. For instance, we need to specify how often we want the Nagios server to check that machine. There are also alert parameters that can be configured to determine when to send email alerts. For example, you can set an option to send an email when the machine stops responding and send another email when it responds again. It is also possible to configure who will receive email notifications. These are just a few examples. Of course, many parameters exist, and adding redundant options to each host can make management difficult. For instance, if you have 20 hosts with the same setting, such as checking each host every 10 minutes, changing that parameter for all hosts can become complicated if you have to modify each one individually. That's why it's possible to create templates in Nagios. You can then use the use instruction along with the template name to specify which template you want to use. Before adding it, let's take a look at the template configuration file. I will save and close my host configuration file for now. We will return to it later. In my directory /etc/nagios4/objects, I have a configuration file called template.cfg, which is created by default when you install Nagios, at least from the Ubuntu repositories. If you installed it in a different way, you might need to create this file to put your templates. Now let's open it. Inside, we have several templates, including templates or contacts, which will be a topic for a future video. We also have a generic template for hosts. This is the type of template that interests us for this video, a define host template. Additionally, there is a template for Linux servers. So what exactly is a host template? It's similar to a host configuration. It uses the same define host instruction, and we can include all the parameters that we can assign to our hosts. The only exception is that there is an additional line called register with the option set to 0. This indicates that it is not a real host, but rather a template. When a host uses a template, it inherits all the parameters defined in that template. For example, if you have 5 Cisco switches in your network that you want to monitor every minute, you can include these parameters in the template. You can create a new template or use an existing one. Set the options you want, and in your host configuration, use the use instruction along with the template name. In fact, we will do that right now just to demonstrate it. In my case, I could have used the existing Linux template. However, I will create a new one just to show you. So I will copy the existing Linux server template and rename it. When creating a template, give it a relevant name. For instance, if it's for the routers in your network, you could name it template router. In my examples, I will call it template host. All my hosts will utilize this template. I will keep it very simple. We can explore the options and adjust them as needed. If the default options suit your configuration, you can leave them as they are. Otherwise, feel free to make adjustments. Again, we can use the use instruction. Yes, a template can use another template. In my case, all the machines that use the template host will inherit these configurations, along with all the configurations defined in the generic host template. If the generic host also has a use instruction, it will inherit parameters from that other template. Perhaps you're wondering what happens when the same option is defined in multiple places across various templates. The parameter defined at the top takes precedence. For example, if you create a router and set a check period, the specific instruction in the host will override any configuration for that parameter in the templates. If the parameter is not defined in the host, it will use the one from the template. If that parameter is also defined in another template used by the template, the setting will be taken from the first template, the one defined on the host. So that's how the system handles parameters defined multiple times. The check period refers to the schedule at which the hosts using this template will be monitored. In my case, it's set to 24/7. The check interval indicates how often the host will be checked. In this case, for machines using this template when their status is OK, so in a normal state, a check will be performed every 5 minutes. If the machine stops responding to the ping, Nagios will check the status every 1 minute. And finally, this parameter determines how many times it will check before sending an alert or an email. In my case, it will check 10 times before sending a warning that the host is down. Next, we have the command that will be used for the check. In my case, it's a ping command to verify if the host is alive. This command comes by default in Nagios and is commonly used for host checks. If you want to monitor anything else for this host, it will be done through services. Different commands will be used in the services configuration. As I mentioned earlier, all of this will be explained in several future videos. In each video about a specific service, I will explain and demonstrate which command to configure for that service. Now, let's discuss some additional parameters related to alerts notifications. This includes the situations in which Nagios should send an email and to whom. The notification period specifies when an alert should be sent. In this case, it's during work hours, meaning weekdays and business hours. In Nagios, there is a configuration file where you can set up schedules and time periods. Each schedule has a name. For example, 24/7 is the name of one schedule, while work hours is the name of another. That config can be found on the file named timeperiod.cfg. It contains all the defined time periods in your Nagios system. If you want to learn more about this, I recommend checking out my video on how to configure email alerts in Nagios. The notification interval determines how often the alert should be sent again if the problem is not resolved. In my example, it will be sent every 2 hours or every 120 minutes. If a host using this template becomes unresponsive, I will receive an alert every 2 hours until the issue is resolved. It is always possible to silence a host from the Nagios web console if you are aware of the problem and know that it cannot be fixed immediately. The notification options specify when we want an alert to be sent and under what conditions. D is for when the host is down, U is for unreachable, and R is for recoveries. It means when the host returns to the OK status. If you're wondering about the difference between down and unreachable, Nagios has an excellent page explaining this. In Nagios, when you have configured a network topology and are monitoring all the machines within that topology, Nagios can recognize that if, for example, the router is not responding, it does not necessarily mean that the other devices behind the router are down. Instead, they are simply unreachable because the router is down. For instance, as illustrated in the Nagios documentation, if router 1 is down, other devices, such as some website.com, will be marked as unreachable. The contact group specifies who will receive email notifications. By default, Nagios includes a contact named Nagios admin and a contact group called admins. The Nagios admin contact is a member of the admins contact group. Once again, more details about this can be found in my video on configuring email alerts, and the link will be in the description. So for a basic configuration, that small config works effectively. I would say these are the options I frequently use in my Nagios setups for my host. If you want a comprehensive list of all possible options for an object, I encourage you to check the Nagios documentation page. Click on Host Definition, where you will find all available options, with mandatory options in red. These must be specified either in the host definition itself or in one of the used templates. The documentation also provides a configurations example and a descriptions for each option. So we will now add this template to our new host. I will save and close this template configuration file and then reopen my hosts file. I will add the line use followed by the name of the template I just created, which is template host. So there you have it. We now have a very simple host configured. I will exit and save this host file. After modifying configurations in Nagios, it is essential to restart the Nagios service to apply these new changes. But before restarting the Nagios service, I like to run a very useful command for validating the configuration. This command checks the main Nagios configuration file, as well as other config file used by Nagios, including those we added earlier to identify any syntax errors or invalid commands. For example, if I mistakenly wrote an incorrect instruction in one of the configuration files, this command will show me that error. Validating the configuration before restarting the service is very useful, because if there is a syntax error in the configuration file, the service will fail to start after the restart. By using this validation tool, we can catch syntax errors before restarting the Nagios service. Another valuable aspect of this command is that it will notify us if we have forgotten to include a mandatory instruction for a host or service. For example, if we configured a host to use a specific template that does not exist in our configuration files, it will indicate that object is not defined anywhere in Nagios. When running this command, it's important to pay attention to the last lines, specifically the number of warnings and errors. In my case, both are 0, which means everything looks good. If there were any errors, the command would provide details about them. This tool deserves a dedicated future video to explain some tips on how to handle errors. Since there are no errors in my case, I will proceed to restart the Nagios service. Next, I will open the Nagios web console to check if the host has been successfully added. I will enter my username and password. Once logged in, if I click on Hosts in the left menu, I can see my hosts. For now, I only have 2. Localhost is the Nagios server itself, along with the machine I added, which is currently in an up status, indicating it is okay. A machine that is up in a network typically means it is responding to pings and is active. If I were to turn off that machine, its status would change to red. Let's do that together now. I will shut down my small Ubuntu server from my Proxmox server. I will wait a few minutes. Based on the earlier configuration, this machine is monitored every 5 minutes, so it can take that long before its status turns red. Of course, I can click on the machine and choose to reschedule the next check to expedite the process. I will click on Commit and then Done. Now, if I go back to hosts, I need to give it a moment to update. I will click again and there you go. The machine is now red and is no longer reachable. If I start my virtual machine again, it will turn green after a minute. As we saw in the configuration, when the machine is not in an OK status, Nagios checks every minute to see if it has returned to an OK state. If email notifications were configured, I would receive an alert after 10 attempts. All of this is covered in another video. So, that concludes this video about adding a host in Nagios. As you can see, I aim to create a video for each topic. If you need help or information on another subject related to Nagios, I invite you to check out my Nagios monitoring playlist. If you don't find a video that addresses your needs, please leave a comment. Maybe it will be done in a future video, or maybe someone can answer your question directly in the comments. Feel free to comment as well to let me know if you use Nagios, if one of my videos helped you or if you enjoyed any of my content. I always appreciate your feedback. You probably already know how to support someone on YouTube. You can like if you enjoyed the video, subscribe to the channel, or even leave a tip. We never know. Maybe one of my videos saved your life. Perhaps you found yourself in a critical situation where everything was about to explode if you didn't fix the problem, and one of my videos helped you resolve it. So that's it, and now I want to take a moment to wish you a great day. Bye bye!